Welcome to 20th Century Stories. Tonight we travel to the Eastern Front in 1943. A mobile fortress moves along winter rails under constant watch. The wider war stretches across vast distances, while here the hours pass in the measured rhythm of steam and steel. Before we begin, settle in. Find a comfortable place. Let your breathing slow. This is your time to drift from the day, to ease into sleep at your own pace. If these quiet journeys help you rest, you can subscribe to 20th Century Stories, so another story is always waiting. The train moves east along a single line of steel that cuts through flat country. Snow lies pressed against the embankment in long drifts. Frost hangs in the trees beyond the telegraph poles. In the cab, the air is warm and heavy with the smell of coal smoke and machine oil. Plates of steel are bolted over the cab walls, their gray paint dulled by soot. Small windows show only narrow strips of sky and the blurred sweep of the landscape. The floor is black with fine dust that clings to boots. The iron grate in the firebox door glows like a furnace when it swings open, casting light across the rivets and levers. The tender behind is piled high with dark lumps of coal. The brass-handled shovel leans ready against the tender wall, its worn edge smooth from years of use. I step forward, take the shovel in hand, and scoop a measured load. The sound of coal sliding onto the steel blade is low and steady. I swing it to the open firebox and let it spill across the burning bed. The flames flare and fold back. The pressure gauge needle shifts a fraction higher. I close the firebox. Door in the cab returns to its warm half-light. With a cloth, I wipe the sight glass clean, checking the water level against the marked lines. The feed pump ticks in its steady rhythm. I turn the damper lever a notch to steady the draw. The brass oil can hangs from a hook above the side rods. I take it down and step to the gangway, leaning out to oil the piston rod ends while the train keeps its even pace. Wind brushes my face through the open side slit. The cold air carries the smell of pine from the passing stands of forest. Beyond the cab, the train stretches in both directions. Armored wagons with narrow gun ports. Flat cars carrying tarpaulin-covered loads. At the far end, a pair of artillery wagons, their barrels sheathed against frost. The rails ahead curve slowly toward a low ridge. The telegraph wires hum with the wind. Somewhere far ahead, another section reports the line clear. I return to the firebox, lift the shovel again, and feed another measured scoop. The glow flares. The engine responds with a deeper, steadier beat. The shift book rests open on the small shelf beside the cab wall. I note the time, the pressure reading, the coal used. Pencil scratching lightly on the paper before I tap the page straight and close it halfway. The locomotive moves on, its steel shell a warm shelter against the frozen landscape, carrying men and equipment along a line where every mile is watched. The curve straightens and the rails stretch ahead in a silver-gray line. Snow drifted at their edges like frozen surf. The embankment drops away into low ground where stands a birch lift pale against the sky. The engine keeps its beat steady. The vibration of the frame is felt through the soles of my boots. Each movement of the rods timed and sure. I lean to check the pressure again. The needle rests in its band, exactly where the driver likes it. I open the firebox door a hand's width and throw in 2 short scoops, enough to keep the heat even without overfiring. The driver glances across, his eyes on the track ahead. one hand resting on the regulator, the other on the whistle cord. Outside, the wind carries the thin cry of the whistle forward, where it echoes between low cuttings in the earth. The rails hum in the cold as the wheels pass. We move through a stretch of open ground where snow has gathered against the telegraph poles. Some lean slightly, weighted by frost. The wires sag between them in long curves, humming faintly as the wind moves along them. To the right, the frozen river lies under a hard skin of ice. Here and there, dark cracks trace across its surface. Beside it, a cluster of huts stands silent, smoke rising from only one chimney. In the wagons behind us, men sit on benches bolted to the steel. Stove pipes push smoke through small roof vents. Their rifles are racked along the walls. The gun wagons at the rear carry their weight quietly. Barrels under canvas, breech mechanisms greased and covered. On the flat cars, crates are lashed tight under tarpaulins, stiff with frost. The cab smells of coal gas and hot metal. The firebox roars softly each time it is open. The shovel handle warms in my gloves from its time leaning against the plate. I oil the eccentric rods again, the motion smooth from habit. A single drop on each point where steel turns against steel. Then I close the oil can and hang it back in its place above the bench. The feedwater pump ticks steadily. I check its intake and outlet valves, listening for any change in pitch. Driver nods once, satisfied with the sound. He reaches to the whistle cord again as we approach a point where the line crosses a frozen track. The blast rolls out, quick and strong. On the far side of the crossing, a sentry raises his hand in return, his coat stiff with frost. Beside him, a brazier burns low, casting light against the snow. Another figure steps up to stir it, sparks rising into the air. I note the time of the crossing in the shift book, the line of numbers straight and even. The pages smell faintly of graphite and coal smoke from being kept in the cab. The train's weight presses into the rails, the sound deep, even growl beneath the wind. A distant semaphore shows caution against the pale sky. The driver eases. The regulator and the weight of the train draws tight along the couplings. The beat of the exhaust slows to a steady thud that carries through the floorboards. I open the firebox and shake the grates with the long bar. Clinker drops with a muted fall, the glow steadies, and I dress the fire with short, even throws across the back corners. The heat folds in waves, then settles. We roll toward a siding beside a small block post. Timber walls dark with creosote. A narrow window where a signalman leans over a desk. A stove pipe sends a thin thread of smoke into the cold air. A crew of trackmen stand by a stack of fresh sleepers, their boots dark against the snow. One bends to tighten a fish plate with a long spanner while another chalks a mark on the rail web. Their movements are unhurried and sure. The driver sets the brake with a smooth hand. The buffers compress and the whole train comes to a calm, heavy rest. Steam drifts from the cylinder cocks in white clouds that fade into the wind. I step down to the tender footplate and reach for the water hose that hangs from the standpipe. The iron is cold in my gloves. The hose coupler locks to the tender intake with a turn that clicks into place. The driver opens the valve on the stand and water, rumbles through. The tender shifts slightly as weight rises in the tank. I watch the gauge float lift in the small glass tube and call out the level with a nod. The hose shivers once and then runs smooth. I check the joint for leaks and wipe a thin spill that crawls toward the edge. Beside us, a flat car carries crates, stenciled with route markings, tarpaulins tied with rope in clean hitches. A corporal walks along the side counting lashings, his breath a faint cloud as he notes figures in a pocketbook. Farther back, the armored wagons sit closed and still. Vision slits dark, snow soft on the roof edges. A stove pipe from one car sends a steady plume that bends with the breeze. I take the sand filler cap from the dome and lift the canvas bucket, pouring slow to keep the grit dry. Sand will bite on icy rails when the throttle opens again. The rope handle creaks in my mittened hand, and the grains hiss into the chamber. The signalman steps out with a flag folded under his arm. He moves along the platform edge and checks the points lever. Steel clacks as he locks it home. A bell rings once inside the post, a small sound, tidy and clear. I close the tender valve, and the driver spins the standpipe wheel to shut the water. We stow the hose and tap the coupler free, then I set the cap and wipe the lip clean. The tender smells of wet iron and coal dust. In the short halt, the shift book comes out again. Time noted, water taken, coal remaining marked by estimation. Against the last delivery, the pencil strokes are even and slow. The page edges are smudged from years of cinders and gloves. A maintenance man walks the length of the locomotive with a lamp hooded against the wind. He touches a hand to each axle box and waits, feeling for heat that would warn of a dry bearing. Satisfied, he nods once and lifts the hood to show a thin stripe of light across the wheels. The signal arm lifts to clear, the blade moving with a clean arc. A green board shows through the slot. The wind presses gently at the coat back as I climb to the cab and take my place by the fire door. The driver gives a small pull on the whistle cord. A short salute that lifts and fades. I open the firebox, lay in 3 even shovels across the front, and close to keep the draw steady. The injector takes a small feed, water singing through the delivery pipe. The pressure needle holds within its white band. We move away from the siding with a deepening beat and a slow, certain pull. Wheels find their grip over the sanded rail. Behind us, the block post grows small and then slips out of sight beyond. A curve of piled snow and birch trunks. Ahead, the line threads between low hills where wind has carved long, sinuous shapes in the drifts. The sky is a pale wash. The light is thin and clean. I lean to the side slit and feel the cold pass over my face. I taste the coal smoke and the hint of resin from cut timber somewhere along the line. Then I turn back to the fire, to the steady warmth and the measured rhythm of the engine. The afternoon draws on with a calm, even tone. The wheels sing a soft note on straight rails and thrum low on the joints. The rods flash dull under a skim of soot. The cab holds its pocket of heat and motion. I clean the sight glass with a quick pass of the cloth. Water shows true between its marks. The driver feathers the regulator to hold grade, then settles his hand back to the rest. A field kitchen car somewhere behind breathes a thin aroma of broth and black bread. The scent threads forward on the slipstream, faint but steady. The men there will serve in turns from a tin ladle. The bowls handed out along the bench seats. I take a small tin from the shelf, enamel chipped along one edge, and set it on the cab warming plate where steam lines give off a gentle heat. A slice of bread rests against the tin. A cup of tea sits on the ledge. the liquid dark and still. When the fire is even, I take 2 slow sips and return the cup to its place. The taste is simple and strong, the heat welcome against the breath of the side slit. Along the embankment stand telegraph repeater boxes at measured intervals, each with a metal door and a stenciled number that passes like a clock face in front of the cab. The wires carry the line's quiet speech from post to post. We overtake a track patrol moving on a handcar, 2 men pumping the handle in a smooth seesaw, one standing to look along the sleepers for frost heaves and split chairs. Their lantern is hooded, the glass smoked to a thin stripe. From time to time a distant rumble travels the air and seems to rest in the bones of the steel. It is only the long echo of our own consist returning from cuttings and low stands of pine. The world answers and then fades. I put a hand to the lubricator's sight feed and watch the small beads of oil climb and fall, precise and regular. The pump tick matches the engine beat like a steady accompaniment. On the driver's shelf a folded timetable lies under a stone paperweight. Beside it a card with gradient figures, mile by mile. The line rises in small steps toward the next district, then falls away toward river country. I stop the injector and listen as the boiler breath evens. The needle settles where it should. The fire shows a low blue along the great edges, a sign of clean draw and good fuel. With the long hook I pull the clinker toward the hopper and shake a dusting of ash down to clear the bars. Not a heavy rake, only enough to keep airways open. The flames respond with a calm, measured fold. We pass a siding filled with timber stacked to shoulder height, each length painted with a number at the end. A lone figure makes notes at a small desk under a lean-to, the paper held down by a smooth stone. A brazier lives in a ring of old brake shoes at his feet. Beyond the timber yard a low trestle spans a frozen marsh. Posts of dark wood rise from the ice. The engine takes the bridge with a change in tone, a hollow resonance that lasts only a handful of heartbeats, and then returns to the usual song. I make another entry in the shift book, a neat line for water used and fuel burned since the last mark, numbers and words arranged in calm order, the handwriting steady despite the vibration of the cab. A small depot appears ahead, painted in dull color to hide in winter light. The station name is picked out in simple letters. A line of wagons stands on the loop with canvas covers drawn tight. A woman in a long coat carries a crate toward the office. Her boots crunching on crusted snow, a railway guard walks the platform and checks door latches with the flat of a gloved hand. His cap sits low, his scarf tucked under the collar. He pauses to watch our engine pass and lifts 2 fingers in a brief acknowledgement. The driver returns a short pull on the whistle. The note slides along the depot wall and rests for a moment in the still air before it is taken by the wind. We keep our pace, not fast and not slow, the speed of a heavy train with a sure timetable and a long road. Ahead, the light begins to lower, and the metal of the rails takes on a soft shine that comes with the hour between afternoon and evening. When the world holds its breath and waits for the first blue of dusk, I open the firebox for a measured feed. 3 across the front and 1 to the back left corner, then close to hold the draw. The handle warms the leather of my glove. The shovel leans back to its place against the tender plate. The injector sings a moment and then stills. The pump ticks a steady metronome. The engine breathes like a living thing, patient and reliable, In the side window, the sky rolls by in bands of pale color. The first star, not yet visible, the line ahead, a dark thread laid over snow and wood and quiet villages that pass without sound. I stand in the glow and keep the numbers where they belong. The work is simple and exact, and the train moves forward, a long body of steel with a warm heart, steady against a winter that asks for care and attention and nothing more. Dusk settles as a slow blue along the tree line. The rails take on a faint sheen that guides the eye. Forward, the temperature drops and the smoke from the stack hangs lower before slipping away with the wind. The driver reaches to the lamp shelf and checks the hooded gauge lights, small flames trimmed to a steady size. Wicks cut neat to keep the glow even and soft. I unclip the hand lamp and test the shutter by sliding it half closed. The beam narrows to a thin stripe that will not carry far. Good for night work when light must be careful and directed. At the cab front, the headlamp wears its blackout hood, a narrow slit instead of full glass. I wipe the slit with a cloth and ensure the latch sits tight. No glare to announce us beyond what is needed to read the line. Behind, marker lamps show dim through their visors. A pair on the last wagon, trimmed to the required color. Their light muffled, steady, and correct for night running. We ease down for an inspection point before the river. A small platform of planks and a short shed set into the cutting. 2 sentries step from the lee of the wall with slung rifles. Coats buttoned high, faces turned red by the cold. The driver sets the brake and the train settles, couplings drawing in with a soft clack. Steam drifts in low clouds from the cocks. The only loud sound is the quieting breath of the exhaust as it drops to an idle. I take the long bar and shake the grate in slow strokes. Clinker falls through with a dull hiss. Then I dress the fire with a thin spread across the front and corners to keep the bed lively without a flare. A line officer climbs to the footplate. With a clipboard under his arm, he checks the consist sheet and the wagon numbers and signs against the hour. His pencil moves in short, sure marks. The paper carries the smell of cold air and smoke. He nods toward the river and speaks low about guarded bridges and single line working after dark. A pilot will meet us at the far signal, and the span will be crossed at the night speed with no whistles used beyond hand signs. I oil the motion again, feeling each joint for warmth with the back of my glove. I touch here and there, just enough to keep the music of steel clean and regular. The lubricator sight feeds are topped, so the beads climb at the right pace. The driver checks the brake rigging with the lamp shuttered to a thin stripe, watching the rods take up and release with each small movement of the valve. Satisfied, he marks a note on the pad he keeps folded in his breast pocket. In the tender, I pull back the canvas and take 2 measured loads of coal forward, building. A neat cone near the lip for quick reaches in the dark. The shovel goes back to its place, the handle warm against the plate. The signal at the far end shows the pilot lantern, a guarded glow moving like a star just above the rail. The sentry at the shed lifts a hand and answers with a small arc of his own lamp. The officer steps down, flags the pointsman, and the blade shifts with a clean metal sound. Our path set for the river. Our pace, to be sure, and even until the far bank is made, we move out with a low pull, sand tapping from the dome to bite the cold rail. Wheels turn without slip. The headlamp slit finds the line and holds it as if pulled by string. The approach to the river carries a change in sound. The ground opening to water under ice, the air colder and still. The telegraph wires vanish into the dark and pick up again far away. At the bridge, the pilot lantern rides just ahead of the buffer beam, its light a small coin against the steel. Lattice. Our own lamp stays dim and narrow. The driver keeps the regulator at a careful notch, and the brake just kissing the wheels. The first span takes us with a hollow note that rises from the girders. The deck plates send back a soft drum of wheel after wheel. The river below is a black field with pale cracks that catch the starlight. I keep the fire shut and the damper set small to avoid any flare. Pressure holds in the white band, the needle steady. I stand still and listen to the bridge sing its low iron song, while the train places its weight with calm exactness. Mid-span, a gust moves through the truss like a slow breath. The pilot lantern swings once and settles. On the far bank, 2 more lamps answer with short arcs. The guard detail stands as shadows against the snow. We leave the last girder, and the tone returns to the soft earth of the embankment. The driver closes the brake, lifts the regulator a fraction, and the engine takes the line with a deeper beat that feels like warmth returning to the bones. I open the fire door a hand's width and lay in a cross of light charges, 4 small throws placed even so the bed brightens without sending sparks. The blue at the great edges shows good air and clean burn. The sight glass clears under the cloth and shows water true. The injector sings for a short feed and then stills. I tap the gauge rim and watch the needle nod and settle again at its mark. Behind us, the bridge lamps draw smaller until they rest as quiet points along the horizon, then fade into the dark. That wraps the river and the fields beyond. Night takes hold in full measure. The cab is a pocket of glow in a long sweep of black and blue. The wind hardens along the tender and carries puffed smoke away in a low stream. A frost flower grows along the lower edge of the side window. I wipe a clear arc with the back of my glove. Crystals break and drift like bright dust for a breath, and then vanish in the warm air. The driver checks the time against the card of gradients and the next post, then settles his hand back to the regulator. He keeps his posture easy and his attention wide, listening to the engine the way a man listens to another heartbeat. Somewhere ahead, a siding holds a maintenance train. Its lamps shuttered, its crane boom resting on a timber cradle. The line crew will sleep in their coach until a call comes for a frost break or a fallen limb. I make a neat line in the shift book for the bridge taken under pilot. The hour, the pressure, the water, the coal used since the inspection point. Numbers and words arranged with care so the record stays calm and useful. The armored wagons ride quiet, their wheels a steady whisper, their ports dark and closed. A stove somewhere aft glows through a vent and breathes a thread of smoke that flows back along the train. On the far field, a low barn shows a faint square of light. Then the square goes black. Perhaps a door closed against the night air, perhaps a lamp turned down to save oil. The world is mostly dark and still and kind to a train that wishes to pass unseen. I run a hand over the shovel handle and the iron edge, checking for burrs by touch. The tool is simple and exact, the line between coal and flame made by its weight and balance and the habit of the arm that moves it. The rails ahead curve into the first long grade of the night. The driver nods, and I answer by opening the fire door and feeding the corners, a light fan across the center, then closing to hold a clean draw. The engine answers with a deeper breath that settles into the frame. The night run begins in earnest, steady, and sure. The wagon covers drumming softly in the moving air, the telegraph wires silent companions, the cab a warm cell of light, where numbers stay where they belong, and the road unfolds in measured miles. Midnight gathers along the embankment like a low tide of cold. The sky a deep blue that holds a faint dusting of high cloud. The rails ahead a narrow ribbon with a quiet shine that the headlamp's slit follows without straying. The engine breathes in a steady cadence. The blower set barely on to keep the fire lively. When the regulator eases, the exhaust a soft pulse that folds back along the boiler and vanishes into the slipstream. I check the sight glass and see water true between the marks. The injector takes a short feed and sings for a moment. Then I shut the valve and listen to the note fade. The needle on the pressure gauge holding in its white band without drift. The shovel stands ready against the tender plate. I lift it and lay 2 light throws to the back corners, then close the door to hold a clean draw. A faint blue glow at the great edges showing air moving right where it should. Coal dust rides the warm air in the cab and settles on the brass edges of the gauges. I wipe the rims with a cloth so the numbers show clear in the hooded light. Small tasks that keep the pocket of order intact. Along the right-of-way the telegraph posts pass in a careful march, each with a number plate that catches the lamp slit for a breath and then turns dark. The wires themselves a faint line against the sky, like thread pulled tight from horizon to horizon. A watch detail stands by a culvert with their coats buttoned high, a lantern shuttered to a narrow stripe resting on a crate. One man notes times in a small book while another stamps his boots to press warmth back into his feet. We nod as we pass and the driver gives a short lift of the hand rather than a whistle. Night rules holding steady so sound does not travel needlessly across the fields. Behind us the armored wagons keep their calm weight, ports closed, stoves ticking low, the long body of the train moving as a single thing with a quiet mind of its own. Somewhere far to the south a road is said to be frozen hard and rutted with iron tires, convoys taking supplies toward other towns, but here the rails carry our measured path and our timetable. A gentle fall in the gradient asks for a lighter hand. The driver feathers the regulator and touches the brake just enough to kiss the shoes. The tone of the wheels changes to a lower hum that runs through the cab floor like a muted chord. I check the lubricator sight feeds, watching the small beads climb and fall in their glass tubes, each beat matched to the engine's pace. Then top the cups with a careful touch from the oil can and hang it back on its hook. The long hook lifts the clinker edge and lets a lace of ash fall through. Not much, only what keeps air clean under the bed. Then the grate settles, and the fire folds in on itself with a soft, even breath. On the shelf the gradient card shows a short rise before the next post, and a water crane marked in pencil at the siding beyond. I run a thumb over the paper and feel the impress of older notes beneath the surface, years of careful entries pressed into the fibers. I lift the tin from the warming plate and take a measured sip, the tea steady and plain, the heat a small. Good thread through the chest, then I set it back and wipe the plate so it does not glaze with spilled sugar. Snow begins as a light sift that the lamp slit catches as silver dust, flakes sliding past in gentle streams. melting as they touch the warm edge of the cab and vanishing without mark. The driver checks his watch against the card, then nods once toward the dark ahead where a distant post shows the faintest square of guarded light, a sign that the siding lies near and the crane will be waiting. The whistle cord stays still in his hand. We run by night rules and keep the cab quiet, the headlamps slit and the marker visors doing their work without spill, the engine a warm heart moving inside a long coat of steel. I draw the damper a notch to hold the fire bright but low. Then take the bar and give the grate a single slow shake, enough to clear the edges, the sound a soft hiss, and the smell of clean heat returning as the flames settle. The rails speak a little louder as we come onto chairs that show fresh frost, the beat of the joints marking time in the floorboards, the tender coal rustling as the grade asks for a touch more pull. The siding opens like a quiet harbor, a low platform, a short office with a window hooded against light, a crane beside the standpipe with its arm turned toward the track. The driver sets the brake in a long, smooth stroke. The couplings draw in and the consist settles, steam breathing from the cocks in white that lifts and thins into the cold. I step to the tender footplate and catch the hose head, the iron cold even through the glove. The coupler turns home with a firm click, and the wheel at the standpipe opens to a low rumble that runs through the tender skin. A gauge float rises in the glass as the tank takes weight. I call the level in measured beats, and the driver answers with short nods. We watch the joint for leaks and wipe a thin bead that forms and beads again. Small work done without hurry. A storeman in a heavy coat walks the platform with a clipboard. Under his arm he checks the numbers chalked on our leading wagon and lifts a hand in acknowledgement. The smell of cordite long faded from the load. Now only cold canvas and clean rope. I trim the hand lamp wick with the small shears so the flame burns even, then test the shutter and set it to a narrow stripe. The beam falls on the brake rigging and opens clean metal for a breath before I close it again. Sand goes into the dome through the filler, a dry hiss from the canvas bucket. Enough for the grades marked ahead. The rope handle creaks once and lays quiet. The cap turns down and seats with a soft metal note. The driver checks the springs over the axle boxes with a quick push of the boot, feels the give and listens to the reply in the frame. Satisfied, he writes 2 neat figures on the small pad he keeps folded and tucked into his breast pocket. The water reaches the mark, and I shut the tender valve while he closes the stand. We lift the hose, tap the coupler free, and lay the line back on its rest. A simple set of motions that keep the rhythm of the night intact. The signal at the far end gives us a guarded green under its hood, the arm barely seen, the plate showing the right shape for our movement, the path laid for the next stretch of dark rails and quiet miles. I climb to the cab and set 3 short shovels across the front, 1 to each corner, and a light lace across the center, then close the door and feel the engine answer with a fuller breath, pressure holding where it should, water standing true. The driver lifts the regulator in a careful notch, and the wheels find their bite, sand tapping onto the cold steel. The couplings take up with a soft pull, and the train moves out of the siding into snow that falls with an easy hand. Behind us, the office window shows a small square of light that narrows and fades. The standpipe arm turns with a quiet squeal. As a man closes its hinge, the platform draws away, and the line narrows to a single bright thread in front of the buffer beam. The telegraph wires return as dark lines against the sky, steady companions that keep the route in quiet speech from post to post. The wind leans along them and makes a low humming that rides beside us for a few breaths and then drops away. The night opens again, wide and still, the cab a warm room of brass and iron and coal, the book open on its shelf, the numbers kept where they belong while the train settles into its long, even pace toward the next district and the slow blue that will come before dawn. Snow deepens to a fine veil that the headlamp slit turns to rushing silver threads. The air colder now and carrying a faint resin scent from cut timber, stacked somewhere beyond the right-of-way, the driver keeps the regulator at a careful notch. The exhaust note steady and low, the frame a calm vibration underfoot that feels like a quiet drum held close to the body. I open the fire door a hand's width and lay 2 small fans across the center, then one to the rear corner, closing before any flare shows, the blue along the great edges returning like a clean line drawn by air. The sight glass clears under the cloth, water stands true, the injector gives a short song and then rests, the needle on the gauge holding in its white band with a small, sure poise. Coal settles with a soft rustle in the tender. I pull a few shovels forward to build a ready heap near the lip, the shovel handle warm where it meets the palm, the iron edge smooth against the plate. A distant yard appears as a low cluster of shapes hoods over lamps, windows painted dark and spared from any shine. A switchman moves with a folded flag and a lantern shuttered to a narrow stripe. We pass a point's box of timber dark with weather, and creosote, a stove inside, gives a thin plume that is snatched away by the wind. The signal shows our path as a guarded green, the blade just visible where the hood lifts. The driver touches the brake to ease our weight through the throat of the junction. Couplings draw in and then lengthen. The whole consists moving as one long piece of thought through the rails. A post at the platform edge bears a small board with figures for loads and limits, the paint dull and careful, the numbers steady reminders that the line holds itself by rule and measure even at night. I make a short entry in the shift book. Junction passed, hour marked, water to band, coal to mark, the pencil moving in even strokes that keep the page ordered and calm. Beyond the yard, a long cutting holds the wind in a lower voice. Snow dims, and then returns in a light sift. The rails ring a little brighter where frost has formed clean, and even on each chair, the motion needs oil. I take the brass can and step. To the gangway, the piston rod shows a dull sheen under the hooded beam. One drop to the knuckle, one to the slide, one to the joint where the pin turns in its brass. Then the can goes back to its hook. The driver checks his watch against the gradient card. We have a rise ahead that asks for patience and steady fire rather than haste. The engine answers the thought with a deeper breath that settles through the frame. Somewhere far off a dog barks once and goes quiet. A farm light lifts briefly and then closes. The world along the embankment returns to the steady, watched dark that takes trains like a tide. I wipe the rims of the gauges so the numbers stand clear, then draw the damper. A notch to trim the draw, the fire folds in and holds its clean line. The small blue still present at the edges where air passes right. A guard wagon near the rear lets out a brief puff from its stove vent. The thread of smoke runs low and then is lost. a sure sign that the men inside have found the hour for a ladle of broth and a piece of bread. The field kitchen car nearer the middle sends a faint warmth forward. Buttered tin lids clink. A ladle taps the rim of a pot. The small sounds travel along the skin of the train and fade, calm additions to the rhythm of the wheels. We overtake a snowplow standing on a short spur, its blade lifted, and the crew, asleep in their coach, lamps hooded. A shovel leaned against the door with its handle wrapped in cloth, ready for the first drift report at dawn. Telegraph wires rise on taller posts across a low hollow. Their hum changes as the wind shifts, then settles to the same thin tone that has ridden with us for miles, a companion sound almost too soft to name. I take the long bar and give the grate one slow shake, letting ash fall in a soft hiss, then dress the bed with 3 small throws. Set like corners of a square, the door closes, the engine breathes. The needle holds, the road continues, the grade begins, gentle but long. The driver lifts the regulator of fraction and keeps his hand resting there. The wheels take the rail without slip. Sand taps from the dome in a dry whisper that fades at once. I feed the fire in measured steps, 2 to the front left, 2 to the front right. A light lace across the middle, then close, waiting for the breath of the boiler to return to its steady pulse before adding more. The sight glass shows the line between marks as clean as a rule. I take a short feed to hold it where the card prefers for climbs. The injector sings its brief note. The valve closes, quiet returns. Frost grows in small flowers along the cab. Sill, the back of my glove wipes a clear arc on the side window. Crystals lift like dust and vanish in the warm air. The smell of coal and oil and steam returns to its usual mix. Behind the cab, the tender woodwork creaks with the slow twist of the frame. The heap of coal settles a hand's breadth and stills. The shovel rests against the plate with the balance of a tool long used and trusted. A bridge of timber appears. Not long, only a span over a winter creek. The tone under the wheels changes for 3 breaths, and then the earth returns. The echo falls behind us and is gone. Beyond the bridge, a small signal hut shows a square of dim light. A figure inside bends over a desk and straightens, lifts a hand toward the line with 2 fingers shown, and then lowered, the calm sign of all clear. The driver answers with a brief nod and keeps the whistle still. Night rules hold. The headlamp slit draws the twin rails into a single bright thread, and the cab remains a quiet chamber of flame and numbers and breath. I check the lubricator. Sight feeds again, and see the beads climbing at the right pace. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. A small procession that keeps metal from taking heat where it should not. The bar lifts a clinker lip and lets it fall, only a small piece, enough to freshen air to the far corner. Then the hook slides back to its rest, and the fire takes on a clean face once more. We pass a line repair wagon in a short levee, a crane. Arm folded tight, a coil of wire resting in a wooden trough. A man steps out and looks down the rail with a hand to the brim of his cap, then turns in and closes the door to keep the heat. The cutting ahead carries a smell of pine sap from stacks of sleepers, each end painted with a number, each stack tied with wire that sings faintly under frost. The sound small and exact in the cold. The engine holds its beat, deep and regular. The card shows that the summit lies a handful of minutes ahead at our pace. No need for extra fire, only care and patience. I make a neat line in the shift book. Grade entered, pressure held, feed taken in short measure. Coal by estimation to the mark. The book rests open until the minute turns, then I tap the edge straight and close it halfway. A single star shows through thin cloud, then two. The sky lifting slowly from heavy blue toward a drier cold. Signs of the hour that comes before any thought of dawn. At the summit board, the rail takes a gentler note. The driver feathers the regulator down and lets the train gather itself without haste. Brake touched, just enough to kiss the wheels and keep the consist long and even. I shut the damper one notch and trimmed the fire with a pair of small throws. At the corners, the heat holds steady. The gauge remains in its band. The glass shows true. Everything lies where it should. The descent opens to a wide sweep of valley, dark fields, a line of birch like pale brushstrokes against the snow, a far hamlet with a roof ridge striped in white, lamps low and spare under blackout cloth. Somewhere to the east, another line runs along a river bend, guarded bridges, patrols that walk with quiet boots and lamp shutters closed to a narrow stripe. The network, a web of rails watched and measured. We take the first length of downgrade with a tone like a slow wind through a pipe, the wheels singing a little brighter. The frame a steady hum, the cab warm, the work exact and unhurried, the path held by rule and habit and care. The descent lengthens into easy ground, and the driver keeps the brake lightly on, so the couplings stay drawn. The tone from the wheels a calm ribbon that lays under every other sound. I open the fire door a hand's width and place two small throws. To the forward corners, close, and stand still to feel the breath of the boiler return to its steady pace. The blue edge at the grate neat and sure. The sight glass shows water true between the marks. I take a short feed and listen to the injector. Sing and fall silent, the gauge needle holding in its white band without drift. The rim wiped clean, so the numbers read at a glance. Snow moves like fine ash past the headlamp slit, each flake turning to a silver stroke, and then vanishing in the warm air that trails the cab. The wind low against the tender boards and the coal settling with a soft rustle. Behind us the armored wagons ride with quiet weight. Stove vents breathing thin threads that lie along the roofs and are taken by the slipstream. Ports shut, benches steady, kit hung where it belongs. A linesman's hut stands at a curve with its door just ajar. A lamp inside, turned low, a ledger. Open on the table, a coat on a peg by the jamb, a shovel resting against the wall with its blade clean of snow. The driver checks his watch against the gradient card and nods once toward the next post. I make a neat note in the shift book for miles since the water crane and coal by estimation to mark. The pencil leaving a dull shine where the line settles. We come upon a narrow cutting where stone shows through the drift. Frost feathers the face of the rock. Telegraph wires cross overhead with a tight hum that rises and falls as the wind changes by a hand's breadth. I take the oil can and step to the gangway, the shuttered hand lamp a thin stripe over steel. One drop to the knuckle, one to the slide, one to the joint where the pin turns in brass. Then the can returns to its hook and the lamp closes to darkness. The grate gets a single slow shake and a lace of ash falls through. Not much, only what keeps airways clear. The fire folds back into a steady glow, the door shut to hold the draw. The engine answering with a calm breath that fills the frame. A Patrol stands in a covert with their coats buttoned high and a small brazier burning in a ring of stones. One man notes the time of our pass in a little book, while another lifts a hand in a brief sign. The driver returns a nod and keeps the whistle still by night rule. Beyond the culvert, a siding holds a crane on a short consist, boom cradled, hook wrapped, chains coiled like sleeping snakes on a timber bed. The crew coach shows a dim square for a breath and then closes again to keep its heat. The wheels take a set of new chairs and the tone brightens, then falls to the usual song. The rail's a lone instrument under our feet. The beat of the joints spaced like a slow pulse that steadies the breath without asking. I lift 3 shovels. Forward from the tender lip, so the next feed is close to hand. The handle warm where palm meets wood, the iron edge smooth and sure. The tool resting with its familiar weight against the plate. Tea warms in the small tin on the cab plate. I take a slow sip and set it back, the taste simple and clean, a line of heat that sits well in the chest. Then I wipe the plate with a rag so spill does not glaze and turn to varnish. A low bridge of steel crosses a frozen tributary and the tone. Under the wheels goes hollow for a few breaths. The headlamp's slit lays a thin bar along the guardrail, and the water below shows as darkness with pale lines where ice has cracked and refrozen. On the far bank, a small block post carries a hooded lamp that shows a guarded green, the signal arm a shadow against the sky. The points set with a clean clack that reaches us a moment before we pass the blade. The driver feathers the brake and eases the regulator so the consist stays long and calm through the throat of the post, couplings breathing rather than snatching, the whole train moving like a single thought laid over iron. I clean the sight glass once more and check the feed. Pump, tick, the note even and unhurried. Then trim the hand lamp wick a hair so the flame sits flat and steady. Shutter tested to a thin stripe and closed again. The night ahead opens into a wider sweep of fields and timber belts, the telegraph line running at our shoulder like a companion. On a quiet road, the cab a warm room of brass and iron and numbers, kept where they belong. The engine breathing in calm measure as the miles turn under us toward the hour when the first gray of morning begins to show along the east. The night ahead opens wider and the cold grows cleaner. The headlamp slit, laying a thin ribbon along the rail while the sky holds a deep blue with a few hard stars. The telegraph line keeping its quiet company at our shoulder, like a wire drawn. Through the dark, the driver keeps the regulator at a careful notch and rests his other hand on the brake. The frame humming a calm note under the boots. The exhaust a soft pulse that folds along the boiler and vanishes into the slipstream. I lift the shovel and place 2 small throws to the forward corners, then close the door to hold the draw, the blue along the great edge bright but thin. The sign of clean air moving where it should. The sight glass clears under the cloth and shows water true. I take a short feed and listen to the injector sing and fall silent, the needle holding in its white band without drift, the rim of the gauge wiped so the numbers read at a glance. Coal settles with a low rustle in the tender, and I pull 3 shovels forward to build a ready heap by the lip. The handle warm where it meets the palm, the iron edge smooth from long practice, the tool settling back against the plate with a sound that feels familiar and right. Ahead, the line crosses a quiet road under blackout. A single post with a hooded lamp shows a guarded shape. A sentry stands by a brazier and notes our pass in a small book. his breath lifting pale in the beam before the shutter closes and the light becomes only a thread again. A short train waits on a loop with a crane boom folded tight, chains coiled on timber, a coil of cable tied with soft wire, crew asleep in. Their coach with the stove ticking low. The whole consists at rest until a call comes for frost break or fallen limb. We take the throat of the junction with the gentlest touch on the brake, couplings drawn, the consist moving like a long thought, laid over iron. The headlamp slit, sliding along switchblades that shine under a skin of frost. I oil the motion with 3 drops placed where steel turns in brass. 1 to the knuckle, 1 to the slide, 1 to the pin. The brass can goes back to its hook, and the shuttered lamp closes to a narrow stripe, and then to dark. A faint scent of broth threads forward from the field kitchen car, lids tapping, a ladle drawn across a rim with a soft ring, the small sounds moving along the skin of the train and becoming part of the even rhythm of the wheels. The gradient card shows a district boundary in the next miles and a block post, where a brief halt is marked for inspection and a lamp check. Night rules set down in a tidy hand, numbers for speeds and signals written with care. I take the long bar and give the grate one slow shake. A lace of ash falls with a hiss, then the fire folds back into itself. The door closed to hold a clean. Draw the boiler's breath returning to its calm pulse. Frost feathers the lower edge of the side window. I wipe a clear arc with the back of my glove and watch the telegraph plates pass, each number catching the lamp slit for a breath and turning dark again, a quiet count that keeps the hour. The driver checks his watch and nods to the right where a hooded lamp shows a small square through a drift. The post sits low in a cutting, timber dark with creosote. A bell rings once inside and stills, the sound neat and exact in the cold. He eases the regulator and the brake answers with a soft kiss. Steam drifts from the cocks in slow white folds. The wheels hush to a roll that settles us against the rail with calm weight. We come to the mark and stand. I stepped to the tender footplate and trim the hand lamp wick with the little shears. The flame sits flat and steady. The shutter slides to a narrow stripe that shows the brake rigging as clean metal and then closes again. A line officer climbs to the footplate with a clipboard under his arm. He checks wagon numbers and notes the hour against the card, his pencil moving in short strokes that leave no flourish, only figures and initials made to be read without effort. He speaks low about night running and guarded bridges and work gangs stationed by spans and culverts, the words simple and practical. A web of rails watched with care so heavy trains can pass in quiet order. I test the gauge cocks and see water true, then snug the packing on the glass nut a quarter turn so the seal sits right. The cloth wipes the tube and the marks shine again, clear and even. The driver checks the brake by feel, a small take-up and a clean release. Then writes 2 figures on the pad he keeps folded in his pocket, a habit of years that keeps the story of the run in a handful of neat lines. The officer steps down and signals the pointsman. The blade shifts with a clean metal sound. The signal shows a guarded green under its hood. We have the path for the next stretch and the curve that follows the river cut. I lay 3 short shovels across the front and 1 to the rear corner, close, and listen for the boiler to settle into its quiet breath. The pressure needle steady at its mark. The pump tick even and small like a metronome in another room. The E-way-woosie thee. Driver lifts the regulator a notch. and we take the rail as if drawn by string, sand tapping from the dome to bite the cold chairs. The couplings stretch and the consist moves as a single piece of thought into the dark. Beyond the post, the air turns sharper. The river lies low and black with pale lines where ice has cracked and refrozen. The bridge farther on will wait for us at dawn under a pilot lamp and a speed that respects the span. The card shows it in. Calm figures and the margin notes give the river's name and the span length. I make a line in the shift book for the halt and the inspection made, water held to mark, coal by estimation to the figure we carry in the head. Then I close the book halfway and set it on the shelf where the paper warms and the pencil smell becomes part of the cab. Snow thins for a time and the sky opens to a clearer band along the east. Not yet dawn. Only the first suggestion of gray that lifts as a breath would lift a curtain. The rails ahead shining at the edges where the lamp slit touches them and lets them go. The engine keeps its patient rhythm, brass and iron and steam working in agreement. The cab a warm room where the work is simple and exact, the night world moving past like a slow river. The armored wagons riding steady behind with their ports shut and their stoves ticking low. Somewhere far along the network, another train waits in a loop for orders. Another crew notes figures in a ledger. Another bridge guard stamps his feet by a brazier and watches the dark, the country wide and cold and measured by rails and clocks and the careful hands that tend them. I feed the corners once more and close the door. The blue edge shows right where air passes. The gauge holds, the glass stands true. The driver settles his shoulders and keeps his hand light on the regulator, the miles turning under us toward. The slow hour before morning, when breath shows pale and the first birds give a thin call from the river reeds. The east begins to pale by a breath, a thin veil of gray sliding along the low horizon. The headlamp slit keeps its narrow ribbon upon the rails while the sky loosens from deep blue toward dawn. The engine breathes in a calm measure, blowers set low, exhaust a soft pulse that folds back along the barrel, the frame humming a steady note under the boots like a hand on a quiet drum. I open the fire door a finger's width. 3 small fans laid to the front corners and center. Door closed before any flare, the blue along the great edges holding like a fine line of ink drawn by air. The sight glass clears beneath the cloth, water true between marks. Injector singing in a short silver thread and falling silent. The pressure needle steady in its white band. Gauge rims wiped so the numbers sit clean for the eye. Coal rustles in the tender. I rake a few shovels forward to make a ready lip. The handle warm where palm meets wood, the iron edge smooth from long use. The tool resting back with a familiar weight against the plate. Telegraph posts advance in a measured march. Small plates, catching the light and slipping away. The wires humming a thin tone that rides beside us and fades. A companion voice that never insists. A culvert watch stands with coat collars high. A brazier glows within a ring of stones. One man noting hour. Pass in a small book. Another stamping the boards to bring warmth back to the feet. The driver returning only a nod by night rule. Behind us the armored wagons ride with quiet certainty. Ports closed. Stoves ticking low. Kit hung where it belongs. The long body of the train moving like a single thought held in steel. Somewhere to the north a guarded road turns toward river country. Bridges kept by sentries with shuttered lamps. Patrol boots marking slow paths in rhyme. The network a web of measured movement that asks for patience and care. I take the long bar and shake the grate once, slow and even. A lace of ash slipping, through with a soft hiss. The fire folding back to a steady glow. The boiler's breath returning to its calm pulse. The gradient card shows a low rise, then easy ground into the river flats. A siding marked with water and sand. A penciled note in another hand naming the span that follows after dawn. I trim the hand lamp wick with the little shears, flame flat and sure. Shutter tested to a thin stripe, the beam laying a quiet bar. Along the brake rigging and closing again, all light, careful, and directed, the driver checks his watch. Fingers resting light on the regulator. The brake held just to kiss the shoes on the fall. Couplings kept long and calm so the consist moves as one piece. The field kitchen car breathes a thin line of warmth through its vent. Lids tapping. Ladle against the rim in a slow ring. A faint aroma of broth carried forward by the slipstream until it becomes part of the engine's own warm breath. I lift the tin from the cab plate. 2 measured sips of black tea. The heat a quiet line through. The chest, tin back on the plate. Cloth over the edge so sugar does not glaze to varnish. Snow drifts lighter. Flakes turn to quick silver threads by the lamp slit. Then the air clears and the world shows in gentle shapes. Birch trunks pale as chalk. Fences traced under frost. A roof line holding the night's last blue. We overtake a snowplow asleep. On a spur, blade lifted, crew coach dark behind hooded glass. A shovel leaned against the door, with cloth wrapped round the handle. Ready for the first drift call of the morning, a short yard slides past with switchblades shining under a skin of ice. A pointsman moves with a folded flag and a lantern shuttered to a narrow stripe. His boots set down in the same prints he made an hour before. Order returned to itself with each step. The rails sing a brighter tone on new chairs, then settle, the engine answering with the same calm breath. Brass and iron and steam in easy agreement. Numbers kept where they belong. I make a neat line in the shift book. Miles since the last post. Water held to mark. Coal by estimation against the heap. Entries steady, and even so the record reads like a quiet road one can follow. At a glance, dawn gathers as a soft band behind the timber belts. Not light yet, only the thought of light. The first birds giving a thin call from the reeds that line the frozen river cuts. We ease toward a small siding shown on the card. A standpipe waiting, a sand dome marked for top-up. The driver feathers the brake, and the engine settles with a long sigh that drifts in white folds and vanishes. I step to the tender footplate, hose head cold beneath the glove. Coupler turned, home with a firm click. Standpipe wheel opened and water rumbling into the tank. The tender shifting as the float climbs in its glass. Level called in soft counts. The driver answering with small nods. Sand hisses from the canvas bucket into the dome, rope handle creaking once and then still. Cap turned down until the threads seat with a soft metal note. Shuttered lamp showing only a breath of brass before it closes again. A storeman walks the platform in a heavy coat with a clipboard under his arm. Crate numbers read under the hood of his lamp. Lashings checked by touch. His pencil leaving small. Careful figures that will keep their meaning when the day is bright. The driver checks springs over the axle boxes with a slow push of the boot, feels the give, and listens for a reply in the frame. Satisfied, he writes 2 tidy numbers on the folded pad he keeps in his pocket. I shake the grate with long, even strokes. Clinker falling in a muted run. Corners dressed with 3 short throws that brighten without sending sparks. Door close to hold the draw. Pressure still in band. Feed pump ticking like a pocket watch across the room. The signal at the far end shows a guarded green beneath its hood. The point's blade moves with a clean clack. Path set for the river flats and the span beyond. Our speed to be sure and even. By rule, hose lifted, coupler tapped free. Line laid back on the rest, tender cap wiped and seated. Shift book marked for water taken and sand filled. Small motions carried out in a calm order that steadies the hands. We move out of the siding like a thought returning to its work. Sand tapping onto cold rail. Couplings stretching. Headlamps lit, finding the twin threads and keeping them, as if drawn by string. The land lowers to wide ground with wind moving in long, quiet strokes over the snow. Birch stands thin and straight. Clusters of huts set back from the right-of-way. Smoke rising in narrow columns under blackout cloth. Dawn a pale wash behind all of it. Somewhere to the east, a parallel line carries a maintenance train toward. A guarded bridge. The card names that district and the hours it keeps. The network breathing in measured turns like the lungs of a sleeping thing. I oil the motion once more. 1 drop to the knuckle. 1 to the slide. 1 to the joint where the pin turns in brass. The can back on its hook. The shutter closed. The smell of clean oil joining coal and steam to make the cab's familiar air. The driver sets his shoulders and keeps the regulator in a light hand. Brake touched only when the grade asks. The engine answering with a steady heart that never hurries and never lags. The east grows brighter by a shade. The first real gray lifting over the river course. The hour when breath shows pale and every sound seems closer. The hour when a long train rides as if the rails themselves were guiding it home. Dawn gathers. By slow degrees, high pale band along the east that thickens like breath on glass. The headlamp's lit draws a thin ribbon over steel that glows and then fades. The sky loosens from night without haste. The engine breathes in a quiet cadence, lower barely set. I exhaust a soft pulse that settles along the barrel and slips away. The frame gives a low hum that steadies the knees and quiets the chest. I open the fire door the width of 2 fingers. 1 small throw to the forward left, 1 to the forward right. A light lace across the center. Door closed before any flare. The blue at the great edge holding like ink under a soft brush. The sight. Glass clears beneath the cloth. Water true between marks. Injector singing for a breath and then resting. The needle poised in its white band. Gauge rims wiped so the figures read at a glance without effort. Coal rustles in the tender. I draw 3 shovels forward to make a ready lip, the handle warm where palm meets wood, the iron edge smooth and sure, the shovel leaning back to its place with a gentle tap that feels familiar and kind. The river flats open in long strokes of gray and silver, low reeds standing like coned hair under frost. Birch trunks pale as chalk lines against the bank. Our path a measured thread that bends toward the span. A pilot lamp waits ahead as a small guarded star, hooded and steady. The signal shows a quiet shape beneath its visor. The points settle with a clean metal note that hangs in the cold and goes still. The driver keeps his hand light on the regulator, the brake just touching. Couplings drawn long so every wagon follows as if guided by silk. The armored cars breathing. Thin warmth from their stoves. Ports closed and calm, I take the long bar and shake the grate once, slow and even. Ash sliding with a soft hiss. Corners dressed with two short throws that brighten without sparks. Door close to hold the draw. The boiler's breath returning to a level line. Telegraph wires step onto taller posts for the crossing. Their hum rising by a hair and then thinning. The sound a thread that guides the ear as the light grows by small shades. We come to the bridge like a thought setting down in a page. First girder answering with a hollow tone that carries through the saws and fades. The pilot lamp close ahead. Our own headlamp slit kept narrow and low, I hold the fire shut. Damper trimmed to a small pull. Pressure steady in band. Water held true. The cab a warm pocket where brass and iron speak in quiet ticks and breaths that do not ask for words. Below, the river is a dark sheet scored with pale seams. Ice cracked and refrozen in long lines that wander under the truss. Snow dust moves in little threads and settles again without sound. On the far bank, two hooded lamps answer with short arcs. Guards standing with coats buttoned high. A brazier, low within a ring of stones, the glow small and steady. Their faces turn to follow our slow passage, and then down again to the ledger that holds their hour. The wheels place each weight upon the deck with patience, plate after plate answering and falling quiet. The train a long breath that crosses without hurry. Numbers kept where they belong, hands light. Eyes soft, we leave the last girder, and the earth takes our sound. The driver lets the regulator rise by the width of a finger. Brake eased to nothing. The engine answers with a fuller tone that feels like warmth returning to the bones. I open the fire door, a hand's width. 3 small fans laid to the forward corners and the back left. Door closed before any flame lifts. The blue edge at the grate neat and sure, the sight glass clear. The injector resting, the needle unchanged. Snow begins again, fine and slow. Flakes turning to silver threads in the lamp slit, then vanishing in the warm air that trails us. The tender boards creak, once and settle. Coal sighs and becomes still. I trim the hand lamp wick by a hair, flame flat and quiet. Shutter tested to a narrow stripe and closed. The beam remembered in the hand like a measured breath saved for later. The gradient card shows easy ground. Through the reed beds and a block post with a short halt marked for lamp check and a note on single line working beyond the bend. Penciled in another hand, tidy and small. The kind of mark that keeps a day from fraying. The field kitchen car sends a faint line of comfort forward. Broth and black bread moving through the slipstream as a thin scent. Lids touching. A ladle, ringing once on the rim. Then quiet again, I lift the tin from the cab plate. One slow sip, another. Heat crossing the chest in a calm line. Tin back on the cloth so sugar does not glaze. Rag over the plate so the surface stays clean and kind to the hand. Telegraph plates pass like soft beats of a clock, each number catching and releasing our thin light. The posts walking with us toward the block post that waits under a drifted roof and a hooded pane. The driver checks his watch, the second hand smooth as water in a bowl, his other hand resting on the brake lever without pressure, a touch ready and patient. The motion of someone who has learned the road by heart. I set the shovel where the reach is easy. Check the oil can by weight. Feel the packings for warmth with the back of the glove. Each small act done as if time itself were elastic and willing. The hut appears in a soft corner of dawn, timber dark with creosote. A bell rung once inside and then still. A figure moving behind the pane with a clipboard held close. The door set to a careful gap so heat does not run out. We ease down to the mark with hardly any change in tone. Steam drifting in low folds. Couplings drawing and then resting. The train becoming a long, quiet line that holds its shape without. Asking, I clean the sight glass. The cloth making a clear oval that shines in the small light. Cocks tested. Water shone true. The gauge rim wiped so the white band stands like a calm shore. A lamp check passes from hand to hand. Hoods lifted and settled. Wicks trimmed and set low. Colors correct behind their visors. Each lens wiped with a fold of soft rag. A little archive of care kept on a narrow shelf. The officer notes the hour and initials the sheet. His pencil leaving. Neat marks that will make sense to someone who reads them later. Figures and lines that say only that the night was watched, that the rails were kept, that the train moved as it should. We take the line again with sand tapping to the chairs. The headlamp slit steady and narrow. The armored wagons following with their quiet weight. The stoves ticking with a warmth that is enough and not more. I breathe. I listen. I wait between small tasks. The engine breathing with me. The rails speaking in a tone that smooths the mind. The world widening very slowly as the gray along the east thickens toward light. The gray along the east thickens by gentle shades. Reeds darken against the river course. Low roofs hold a last wash of night like ink thinned with water. The rails take a soft shine and return it in a narrow thread to the cab. The engine breathes in a slow cadence. Blower barely open. Exhaust a quiet pulse that folds along the barrel and slips away. The frame humming a note that steadies the hands and loosens the shoulders. I open the fire door the width of 2 fingers. One small fan to the forward left, one to the forward right. A light lace across the center. Door closed before any flare. Shows. Blue edging the grate like a fine line of paint laid by air. The sight glass clears beneath the cloth. Water standing true between marks. Injector singing a brief silver note and resting. The pressure needle poised in its white band. Gauge rims wiped so figures read without strain. Coal rustles in the tender. I draw 3 shovels forward to make a ready lip. Handle warm where palm meets wood. Iron edge smooth and sure. The shovel. Leaning back with a soft tap against the plate, telegraph posts step beside us with their small numbered plates. Each catching the headlamp slit for a breath and slipping away. The wires giving a faint hum that rises and thins like a thread drawn through cold air. A lone hut stands set back from the right-of-way. Door kept to a careful gap. A lamp low behind blackout cloth. A figure bends over a ledger and straightens. A hand lifted in a quiet sign that says all is well and measured. The driver keeps the regulator in a light hand. Rake touched only to kiss the shoes on the shallow falls. Couplings drawn long so the consist moves as one piece. The armored wagons riding with calm weight, ports shut. Stoves ticking low and steady. The gradient card shows a loop ahead for a meet. Single line working marked in tidy strokes. A penciled note naming the hour when the opposing train should take the siding. Margins clean. Numbers kept like stones laid in a path. I trimmed the hand lamp wick by a hair. Flame flat and even. Shutter tested to a narrow stripe. The beam laying one quiet. Bar along the brake rigging and closing again. All light careful and directed. The loop appears out of the river mist. A short platform edged with snow. A points box dark with creosote. A bell rung once inside and then still. The driver feathers the brake and the engine settles with a long breath that shows white and fades. We stand to the mark, wheels quiet. Steam drifting in slow folds. I step to the tender footplate and check the sand filler. Cap seated, dome warm beneath the glove. Then the long bar takes one slow shake at the grate. Ash slipping down with a soft hiss. Corners dressed with two small throws that brighten without sparks. A signalman steps out with a tablet in its leather hoop. His coat buttoned high, his breath pale in the air. He holds the staff with both hands, as if it were a line drawn between districts. He passes it up and receives our own. An exchange neat and certain, the kind of act that holds a network together. Without noise across the loop, an oil train waits under hooded lamps. Tank cars rimed with frost. A guard leaning by his stove vent with a mug held close. He lifts two fingers in acknowledgement and returns to his ledger. The lamp within his van drawing a small square of honey color that dims and then glows again. I make a line in the shift book for the meat made and the tablet taken, hour marked, water held to band, coal by estimation against the heap. The pencil moving in strokes that are slow enough to be read by anyone who comes after. The signal shows our path beneath its visor. A guarded green like a leaf in winter. Points slide with a clean metal note and seat. The driver nods once. I set 3 short shovels across the front and close the door. The boiler's breath returning to a level line. The pump ticks small and regular like a watchherd in another room. We move out with sand tapping to the chairs, couplings stretching. The headlamps slit, keeping the twin threads as if drawn by string. Reeds bowing in a faint breeze that rises from the water and folds back into the flats. Snow begins again in fine sift. Flakes turn to quick silver lines that vanish as they touch the warm edge of the cab. Frost flowers grow along the lower pane. I wipe a clear arc with the back of the glove. Crystals lifting like dust and becoming air. Beyond the loop the land lowers to long meadows, then lifts to a line of birch. Trunks pale as chalk. Branches holding small parcels of snow that drop without sound. The world arranged in quiet measures that invite the eye to rest. The field kitchen car sends forward a thinner line of comfort. A ladle ringing once. Lids settling. Lack bread shared in turns. The scent carried along the skin of the train until it is only a thought of warmth within the engine's own breath. The driver checks his watch against the gradient card. The next miles ask for no haste, only patience and small care. I answer with a light trim of the damper and a quiet pass of the cloth over the gauge rims. Figures shining like small moons under the hooded lights. A patrol stands at a culvert with rifles slung and collars high. A brazier glows within a ring of stones. One man notes our pass upon a card. Another stamps the boards in a slow pattern that keeps time without effort. Their lamp shuddered to a thin stripe that closes and leaves the night whole again. We cross a timber trestle, brief as a breath, wheels giving a hollow tone that rises through the saws and fades. Then earth returns and the cab regains its usual. Song, brass and iron and steam in kind agreement. I lift 2 shovels forward from the tender lip, the handle warm where palm meets wood. Iron edge smooth from years of small corrections made with care. The tool rests against the plate and says nothing. It does not need to. It remembers the arm that holds it. On the shelf, the folded timetable lies under the small paperweight. Beside it, the card of gradients. Beneath them, the print of many journeys pressed into the fibers. A quiet archive that says the road is known and can be trusted. Light gathers by slow degrees. Not yet sun. Only a lifting of gray that makes fence lines show and roof ridges come forward. The telegraph plates blink a little brighter when they pass the headlamp slit and then return to shadow. I open the fire door the width of a finger. One small fan to the back left. A breath across the middle, door closed. The blue at the great edge neat and sure. Water true between the marks. Injector, silent and ready. The pressure needle untroubled where it rests. Somewhere ahead a bridge team waits for the day detail. Tools laid out on a plank bench. A ledger folded open to the last neat line. A kettle set near a brazier that will be coaxed to life with a twist of dry grass and a match cupped against the wind. The armored wagons keep their quiet weight. Ports closed, benches steady, kit hung true. The train moving as a single thought through a country that asks for care and gives back distance in exchange. I breathe with the engine, slow and even. Work made of small, exact acts. Numbers kept. Where they belong, light coming without hurry. The miles ahead arranged like calm lines upon a page that waits to be turned without rush. Light gathers with the gentlest hand. Fence posts step out of the gray. Roof ridges show their soft crowns of snow. The rails return a fine ribbon of pale that leads the eye forward without hurry. The engine keeps its quiet cadence, lower barely set. Exhaust a soft pulse that folds along the barrel and slips to the lee. The frame humming a note that steadies breath and hand. I open the fire door the width of 2 fingers. One small fan to the forward left, one to the forward right. A thin lace through the middle. Door closed. Before any flare, blue edging the grate like ink under a careful brush, the sight glass clears beneath the cloth. Water held true between marks. Injector singing for a breath and resting. The needle poised in its white band. Gauge rims wiped so the figures sit. Bright and calm, coal rustles in the tender. I draw 3 shovels forward to make a ready lip. Handle warm where palm meets wood. Iron edge smooth and sure. The tool leaning back with a soft tap against the plate. The river flats give way to low meadows with haystacks hooded in winter cloth. A thin mist hanging like milk over the reeds. Telegraph wires walking beside us with a faint silver tone that rises and thins with the wind. A block post waits under a roof drift, timbered dark with creosote. A bell rung once inside and then still. The driver feathers the brake and we ease to the mark As steam folds from the cocks and dissolves without sound, I take the long bar and shake the grate once. Clinkers slipping with a quiet hiss. Corners dressed with two small throws that brighten without sparks. Door closed to keep the draw clean. The boiler's breath leveling into its calm line, a signalman steps out with orders in a stiff envelope. Hooded lamp low. In his hand, his breath a pale thread. He passes the paper up and names the single line ahead in slow, even words. Bridges guarded. Speed kept. Meats to be made at tidy hours. The driver nods and tucks the envelope beneath the weight on the shelf. He checks the brake by feel. A small take and a clean release. Then writes two neat figures on the folded pad he keeps in his pocket, behind. Use the armored wagons ride with quiet weight. Ports shut. Stove vents breathing a low warmth. Kit hung where it belongs. Boots set heel to toe beneath the benches. From the field kitchen car, a faint line of comfort threads forward. Broth and black bread. Tin lids tapping like soft coins. A ladle brushing the rim and resting again. The scent carried along the skin of the train until it becomes part of the engine's own breath. I trim the hand lamp wick by a hair. Flame. Flat and sure. Shutter tested to a narrow stripe and closed. The beam remembered in the hand like a saved breath. Sand goes to the dome in a dry hiss from the canvas bucket. Rope handle creaking once and then still. Cap turned down until the threads seat with a soft metal note. Dome warm beneath the glove, the signal under its visor shows our path. A guarded green that lifts like a leaf in winter. The points slide. Home with a clean clack. We have the road and the curve that follows the timber belt. We move out with sand tapping to the chairs. Couplings stretching. The headlamps slit, keeping the twin threads as if drawn by string. Snow lifting in fine strokes. And vanishing against the warm edge of the cab, I set the shovel where the reach is easy and take the oil can from its hook. One drop to the knuckle, one to the slide, one to the joint where the pin turns in brass. The can returns, the shutter closes. The motion goes on in quiet agreement. The gradient card shows easy ground, then a slow climb toward a low ridge. A penciled note in another hand marks a siding with water and a small coaling stage of timber and rope. Somewhere off the line a road wakes under iron tires. Sled runners whisper over crusted snow. Smoke rises from a smithy kept low by blackout cloth. The world holds its breath and opens by degrees. I take a measured sip from the tin on the warming plate. The heat a narrow line through the chest. Cloth over the lip so sugar does not glaze. Plate wiped so the metal stays kind to the hand. The sun suggests itself as a pale bloom behind thin cloud. Not a disk yet, only a lifting brightness that makes birch bark shine like chalk. Fence wire glow like a hair of light drawn between posts. We overtake a gang hut set back from the ditch. Door kept to a careful gap. Kettle on a brazier coaxed with twists of dry grass. A foreman notes our pass on a card, his pencil leaving small square figures that will read the same in any light. A culvert watch stands to attention with collars high, a lamp shuttered to a narrow stripe. One man lifts two fingers in a quiet sign. The driver answers with a nod and keeps the whistle still by rule. The wheels speak a touch brighter on chairs that show new frost, then settle. The frame hums its steady chord. The cab holds its warm pocket of brass and iron and breath and flame. I open the fire door a finger's width. 3 light fans placed with care. Door closed. Blue tracing the great edge. Water true, pressure steady. The pump ticks small and regular like a watch heard in the next room. The siding appears as a modest stage of timber posts and a scaffold for buckets. A standpipe with its arm turned toward the track. A storeman in a heavy coat walking the platform with a clipboard held close. The driver sets the brake in a long, smooth draw. The consist settles with soft breath through the couplings. Steam drifts and thins. The headlamp slit rests on the rail foot like a blade laid flat. I catch the hose head. Iron cold beneath the glove. Coupler turned home with a firm click. Standpipe wheel opened, water rumbling into the tender. The float rising in its glass as I call the level in slow counts. The driver answering with small nods. A chain hoist creaks on the timber arm. 2 buckets swing and tip a measured fall. Of coal from a crib to the tender lip. Black stone landing with a muted rush. I rake it even so the heap sits close for the next hours of work. The sand dome takes another quiet hiss from the canvas bucket. Cap seated. The rope coiled and set. Back on its nail. A simple act laid among many simple acts that keep the day from fraying. Orders are read again on the shelf. The envelope flattened beneath the weight. Margin notes added in a small careful hand. Meet times confirmed, spans named. Speeds given as calm figures that hold more meaning than any speech. I make a line in the shift book for water and coal. Taken for sand filled. For lamp wicks trimmed and visors checked. The page smelling faintly of graphite and steam and cloth. The signal lifts under its hood. A guarded green like a promise kept. The points answer with a clean metal word. The driver gathers the regulator a finger's width and we move back onto the main. I feed the corners once more. Close. Feel the boiler answer with a deeper breath. That steadies and holds, the needle staying where it should. The glass showing true. The engine ready to take the slow climb toward the ridge. The sun becomes the softest coin behind cloud. A country brightens without glare. The train stretches forward like a long thought, made of iron and habit and care. And the miles ahead arrange themselves into a quiet page that we will turn in patient lines. We take the slow climb toward the ridge. Regulator lifted by the width of a finger. Sand tapping to the chairs in a dry whisper. The exhaust settling into a deeper note that carries through the frame like a slow heartbeat. I open the fire door a hand's width. 2 small fans to the forward corners. A light lace across the center. Door closed before any flare. Blue edging. The grate like a fine line drawn by air. The boiler's breath returning to its level rhythm. The sight glass clears beneath the cloth. Water held true. Injector singing for a breath and then resting. The pressure needle poised in its white band. Gauge rims wiped so the figures read without effort. Numbers made to calm the eye. Coal rustles in the tender. I rake 3 shovels forward to make a ready lip, the handle warm where palm meets wood. The iron edge smooth from years of small corrections. The shovel leaning back to its place with a familiar tap. Telegraph posts step beside us with their numbered plates. Each catching the light and slipping away, the wires giving a faint tone that rises like a silver thread and thins into the morning. Air frost hangs in soft rags from the birch. A low wind moves the reed beds in slow coned waves. Roofs wake as pale shapes under cloth. Smoke lifts in narrow bands and folds back into the sky. The driver keeps his hand easy on the regulator. The brake touched only to kiss the shoes on short falls. Couplings drawn long so the consist moves as a single piece. The armored wagons, riding with quiet weight, ports shut, stoves ticking low and steady. I take the oil can from its hook. One dropped to the knuckle, one to the slide, one to the joint where the pin turns in brass. The shuttered lamp set to a thin stripe for the pass and closed again. The smell of clean oil joining coal and steam to make the cab's warm air. The gradient card shows the crest a handful of minutes ahead. Then an easy run to a meet at a loop, named in tidy letters. A penciled note in another hand marks the hour and the caution for single-line working, margins clean. Figures set like stepping stones. I lift the tin from the warming plate. One slow sip, another. Heat crossing the chest. And a quiet line. Tin back on the cloth so sugar does not glaze. A fold of rag over the plate so metal stays kind to the hand. We reach the board at the summit. The rail takes a gentler tone. The driver feathers the regulator down. Brake touch to keep the consist long and even. Wheels singing a little brighter. And then, settling, I trim the fire with 2 short throws at the corners. Door closed to hold the draw. The blue edge neat and sure. Water true between the marks. The pump ticks small and regular like a watch in another room. A timber trestle spans. A winter creak. The tone under the wheels turns hollow for 3 breaths and fades. Earth returns, the cab gathers its usual song. Brass and iron and steam in quiet agreement. Ahead, the loop appears as a narrow platform with a points box dark with creosote. A bell rung once inside and then still. A figure at the pane with a clipboard held close. The driver eases the regulator, and the engine settles with a long breath that shows white and thins. We stand to the mark. Steam drifting in low folds. I take the long bar and give the grate a single slow shake. Ash slipping with a soft hiss. Corners dressed with 2 small throws that brighten without sparks. Door closed, pressure steady. Numbers kept where they belong. A signalman steps out with the staff and its leather hoop, his breath a pale thread. Both hands around the tablet as if it were a line drawn between districts. He passes it up and receives our own. A quiet exchange that holds the road together. Across the loop a short consist waits. A crane with its boom cradled. A coil of wire tied with soft bindings. A guard lifting 2 fingers in acknowledgement before turning back to his ledger. His lamp drawing a small square of honey color in the coach and dimming again. I make a neat line in the shift book for the meat made. The hour, the staff taken. Water held to mark. Coal by estimation against the heap. Pencil strokes slow and even so. The page reads like a calm map. The signal under its visor shows a guarded green. The points slide home with a clean metal word. The driver nods. I set 3 small feeds across the front and close. The boiler's breath settles. The pump tick holds time. We move out with sand tapping to the chairs, couplings stretching. The headlamp slit, keeping the twin threads as if drawn by string. The land opening to long meadows and the slow bend of the river where day gathers by gentle shades. Morning spreads like milk through thin cloud. Fences right quiet lines across the fields. Haystacks sit under cloth like sleeping animals. The rails return a thread of pale light to the cab and carry it on without haste. The engine breathes in a softened cadence. Blower barely open. Exhaust a low pulse that folds along the barrel and slips away. The frame humming a note that steadies the hands and loosens the shoulders. I open the fire door the width of 2 fingers. One small fan to the forward left, one to the forward right. A thin breath across the center. Door closed before any flare. Blue edging the grate like ink under a soft brush. The boiler answering in level tone, the sight glass clears beneath the cloth. Water standing true. Injector singing for a breath and resting. The pressure needle poised without drift. Gauge rims wiped so the figures sit bright and calm. The kind of order that lets the mind rest. Coal settles in the tender with a soft rustle. I rake 3 shovels forward to make a ready lip. Handle warm where palm meets wood. Iron edge smooth and sure. The shovel leaning back with a small remembered tap. A block post rises from the reed beds with a hooded pane and a drifted roof. A bell rung once within and then stilled. A sentry steps from the lee and notes our pass on a card. His pencil leaving. Neat square figures that keep meaning when the day grows bright. We cross a culvert where water moves under ice in slow dark seams. Telegraph wires hum a little higher and then thin. The sound a silver thread that rides beside us and lets go. The driver checks his watch against the card of gradients. Next is easy ground toward a low town with sidings set back from the road. A coaling crib marked for emergency only. A standpipe drawn in small, careful strokes. Daylight rules returning by degrees, I take the oil can. 1 drop to the knuckle. 1 to the slide. 1 to the joint where the pin turns in brass. Shuttered lamp set to a narrow stripe for the pass and closed. The smell of clean oil and warm iron becoming a quiet comfort. From the field kitchen car a modest warmth threads forward. Broth and black bread and a tin clink that rings once and rests. The scent caught by the slipstream until it is only a thought folded into the engine's own breath. The town shows as a low spread of roofs, chimneys kept under cloth, smoke raised in guarded threads, a yard throat with blades shining under a skin of frost, a pointsman moving with a folded flag and a lantern shuttered to a thin stripe. We pass at the booked. Speed. The driver keeps the regulator easy and the brake only touching. Couplings drawn long so the consist flows like silk. The armored wagons riding with their steady weight. Ports shut. Stoves ticking low. Benches fixed and sure. I clean the sight glass. Cocks tested. Water shone true. The pump tick holding its small metronome. The gauge needle poised in band. RMS brightened so the figures read at a glance. Nothing hurried. Nothing missed. A maintenance coach stands on a spur with a kettle set on a small grate. A hand reaches from a doorway to turn a page on a clipboard. The paper lifts and settles, the world of rails and clocks and careful hands returning itself to the day. I open the fire door a finger's width. 2 small feeds at the corners, door closed. The blue, edge tracing the grate, the engine answering with a deeper breath and then a calm. The frame humming a note that smooths the chest. Beyond the town, the land levels to open fields. The river bends away and returns as a darker seam. Telegraph plates blink brighter in the growing light and then pass into shadow again. The posts, walking with us like old companions, the driver sets his shoulders and keeps a light hand. The timetable folded under the paperweight. The envelope of orders flattened and marked in the margin with a brief note and initials. Details made tidy and left to rest. I make a line in the shift book for miles since the meet. Water and coal to mark. Sand to the dome made good at the crib. Lamp wicks trimmed and colors checked. A page that will read clear to anyone who needs. It later, a small wind moves the reed beds in slow strokes. Birds give thin calls and then fall quiet. Roofs farther off take a gentle shine that says sun will find them soon. Not yet a disk, only a promise kept. The rails ahead run straight for a long while. A narrow ribbon that leads the eye forward and asks for patience. The cab holds its warm pocket of brass and iron and breath and flame. Numbers kept where they belong. Work made of small exact acts. The light strengthens by soft degrees. Birch bark bright as chalk. Fence wire drawn like a hair of silver between posts. Frost lifting from the ballast in small breaths that vanish as the air warms. The engine keeps its patient cadence, blower scarcely open. Exhaust a quiet pulse that folds along the barrel, the frame humming its low chord. A sound that lays under thought and steadies it. I open the fire door the width of a finger. One small fan to the back left, a breath across the middle. Door closed before any flare, blue edging the grate true and thin. The boiler's breath returning to an even line, the sight glass clears beneath the cloth. Water true between marks. Injector resting, the pressure needle poised without movement. Gauge rims brightened, figures clear and kind to the eye. The pump ticks small and regular, like a watch heard in the next room. Coal slides softly in the tender. I draw 3 shovels forward, the handle warm, the iron edge smooth and familiar. The tool leaning back with a gentle tap that speaks of long use and quiet trust. A patrol by a bridge stamps their boots beside a brazier. Lamp shuttered to a thin stripe. Ledger on a crate with a pencil laid across it. One man lifts 2 fingers in a sign and lowers his hand. The driver answers with a nod. Day rules almost here. Restraint kept until the span lies behind us. We pass. A siding where a snow plow sleeps. Blade lifted. Crew coach closed. A shovel wrapped at the handle so palms do not stick. A small world of tools and habits held ready for the first drift call. The rails sing a brighter tone on new chairs. Then, settle, the train moving as a single thought. Armored wagons steady, ports closed, stoves ticking low. Kit where it belongs. Benches square to the walls. I take the long bar and give the grate a single slow shake. Ash slipping in a soft hiss. Corners dressed with 2 short feeds. Door closed, damper trimmed. The engine answering with a deeper breath that steadies and holds. The telegraph line hums as the wind turns, then thins. Then is only the faintest thread in the ear. A companion voice that neither insists nor fades entirely. A small wayside appears with a painted board and a roof drift. A bell rung once. Within and stilled, the driver touches the brake to keep the consist long through the throat. The headlamp slit, now only a habit against the daylight. Its ribbon of light, quiet and narrow upon the rail. I clean the sight glass once more. cocks set, water shone true, the gauge rim wiped, the white band a calm shore, a pump tick holding. Time, the book open on the shelf with its lines straight and even, the envelope of orders lies flattened beneath the weight. Margin notes finished in a tidy hand. Staff for the next district to be taken at the noon post. The road laid out in quiet figures that hold more meaning than any speech. I breathe with the engine, slow and even, listening between small tasks, feeling each motion return the same answer. Brass and iron and steam agreeing with themselves, the cab warm and steady, the work exact and kind ahead. The land lifts in a soft rise and opens to another stretch of plain, the rails running on in a thin, bright thread, the day settling into itself without hurry, our train moving through it like a long, calm line written across a wide white page. We hold this pace. We keep the numbers where they belong. We let the miles turn under us as if the rails themselves were guiding our hands. The armored wagons breathing their small warmth. The telegraph wires walking by our shoulder. The sky clearing by slow degrees. Somewhere farther on a noon post waits with a staff to exchange and a ledger to sign. A standpipe to use by rule. A lamp to trim though daylight needs little from it. The world of rails made safe by simple acts repeated with care. I feed the corners once more. Door closed, blue tracing the grate. Water true, pressure steady. The pump tick small and sure. The shovel leaning back to its place with a quiet tap. The driver keeps his hand easy on the regulator. The brake ready and light. His eyes soft upon the road he knows. His shoulders set the way a man's do when the day's shape is familiar. And welcome, the line ahead narrows into distance, pale and certain, a thread that promises more ground and more quiet work. The cab keeps its gentle glow. The engine breathes in calm measure, the story of this run laying itself down in even lines that wait to be continued.